On March 1, 2026, American forces conducted approximately 900 strikes against Iranian targets in a single 24-hour period. 900. That number appears in CENTCOM's own public statements. It was reported without significant analysis in most mainstream coverage, treated as a data point in a larger story about the conflict's progress. Journalists wrote it down. Editors published it. Readers moved on to the next paragraph. Nobody stopped to ask what 900 strikes in 24 hours actually requires. This video is going to answer that question, because the answer reveals something about American military power that the strike footage and the satellite imagery and the dramatic headlines do not capture. It reveals the invisible architecture that made those 900 strikes possible. The fuel, the weapons, the food, the spare parts, the ships that nobody photographs, and the sailors whose names never appear in any report. It reveals the logistics. And logistics, as every military historian eventually concludes, is where wars are actually won. Start with the weapons. A single Tomahawk cruise missile costs approximately $2 million. A single JDAM precision-guided bomb costs between $25,000 and $100,000, depending on the variant. A single LRASM anti-ship missile costs approximately $3 million. A single AIM-120 AMRAAM air-to-air missile costs approximately $1.5 million. 900 strikes in 24 hours did not consist entirely of Tomahawks and LRASMs. The majority of strikes were conducted with aircraft-delivered precision munitions, predominantly various JDAM variants and small-diameter bombs. But even at a blended average cost of $200,000 per strike, 900 strikes represents $180 million in munitions expenditure in a single day. That munitions had to exist before the conflict began. It had to be manufactured, shipped, stored, transported to forward locations, loaded onto aircraft and ships, and maintained in ready condition throughout the months of pre-conflict buildup. The weapons pipeline that fed 900 strikes in 24 hours started at manufacturing facilities in the United States 6 to 18 months before the first strike landed. Raytheon, Boeing, Lockheed Martin. The factories that produce precision, guided munitions at rates that are, by peacetime standards, entirely inadequate for high-intensity combat, and that had been operating at surge production rates since the beginning of the regional buildup. The weapons arrived at Diego Garcia, the American base in the central Indian Ocean, and at bases in Qatar, Bahrain, the UAE, and on the ships themselves. They were inventoried, inspected, stored in climate-controlled magazines, and maintained by ordnance teams who work in one of the most dangerous environments in any military. By the time Epic Fury began, American forces had approximately 60 days of sustained high-intensity operations pre-positioned in the theater. 900 strikes in 24 hours was not a one-time surge. It was sustainable. That sustainability required months of logistical work that preceded the conflict by a significant margin. Now consider the aviation fuel. An F/A-18 Super Hornet burns approximately 14,000 pounds of fuel per hour at full power. A carrier air wing conducting sustained strike operations requires enormous fuel consumption. Multiply that across 2 carrier air wings, plus the land-based aircraft operating from Qatar, Bahrain, and Diego Garcia, plus the tanker aircraft that extended the range of everything else, and you begin to understand the fuel requirement. American carriers carry approximately 3 million gallons of aviation fuel in their JP-5 tanks. At high operational tempo, a carrier air wing can consume a significant portion of that reserve in 72 to 96 hours of intensive operations. The carriers were not operating alone. They were part of a logistics chain anchored by the Military Sealift Command's Combat Logistics Force, the underway replenishment ships that transfer fuel, ammunition, and supplies at sea without the carrier ever returning to port. The USNS Rappahannock and other fast combat support ships operated continuously throughout Epic Fury, conducting underway replenishment operations with the carrier strike groups every 2 to 3 days. These operations transfer thousands of tons of fuel and supplies at sea while both ships are moving, a complex evolution that requires precision seamanship and that American sailors execute routinely, without fanfare, as a basic operational requirement. The fuel for those replenishment ships came from pre-positioned stocks in the region and from contracted commercial fuel suppliers working under emergency military contracts. The supply chain stretched from refineries to storage facilities, to replenishment ships, to carrier fuel tanks, to aircraft fuel systems, to the engines burning it over Iranian territory. 900 strikes in 24 hours is also, at its foundation, a fuel logistics operation of extraordinary scale. The human dimension of the logistics operation is the least visible and the most important. A carrier air wing conducting 900 strikes does not do so by flying each aircraft once. It does so by flying each aircraft multiple times. The pilots flying those missions are conducting multiple sorties in a 24-hour period with abbreviated rest cycles in physically and psychologically demanding conditions. The maintenance crews supporting those aircraft are working continuously. An FA-18 Super Hornet requires approximately 30 maintenance hours per flight hour under normal conditions. Under combat surge conditions, with qualified maintainers working extended shifts, that ratio can be compressed, but it cannot be eliminated. The aircraft have to be inspected, refueled, rearmed, checked for battle damage, and certified safe to fly between every sortie. To understand what this looks like in practice, consider the workflow of a single aircraft through a single combat cycle during Epic Fury. An FA-18F Super Hornet launches from the Lincoln's Port Catapult at 0230. It climbs to altitude, links up with a KC-135 tanker over the Gulf of Oman for a pre-strike fuel top-off, proceeds to a target package over southwestern Iran, releases 4 GBU-31 JDAMs against a designated aim point, takes battle damage assessment photographs, proceeds to the post-strike tanker track for fuel, and recovers aboard the Lincoln at 0520. The total sortie time is approximately 3 hours. When it traps the wire and rolls into the landing area, the maintenance cycle begins immediately. An aviation machinist's mate checks the engines for damage and abnormal readings. An airframe's mechanic inspects the landing gear and airframe for battle damage. An avionics technician runs built-in test equipment diagnostics on the navigation and targeting systems. An ordnance man begins loading the next weapons package based on the upcoming mission assignment. A plane captain does a complete walk-around inspection covering hundreds of specific checkpoints. This process, conducted by a team of 7 to 12 sailors, takes approximately 45 minutes to 2 hours, depending on what they find. If everything checks out and the aircraft is clean, it can launch again. If there are squawks, maintenance discrepancies that have to be resolved before the aircraft is safe to fly, the timeline extends. Multiply this process across 70 aircraft in a carrier air wing, running 24 hours a day, and you have a maintenance operation of extraordinary complexity. The flight deck and hangar deck are both in continuous use. Aircraft are being launched, recovered, inspected, repaired, fueled, armed, and launched again in an overlapping cycle that requires precise choreography to avoid collision, fire, or injury. On a carrier conducting surge operations, the flight deck is one of the most dangerous work environments on Earth. Aircraft moving in darkness and noise, jet blast, moving ordnance, arresting wires, catapults. The maintainers and ordnance handlers and deck crew conducting these operations during Epic Fury were doing so under combat conditions, with the knowledge that Iranian missiles had been fired at their ship, with degraded sleep, with the adrenaline and the fear and the professionalism that define what carrier operations actually look like from the inside. The 900 strikes in 24 hours were launched by pilots. They were enabled by thousands of sailors on the ships below. The pre-conflict logistics buildup that made Epic Fury possible began in earnest approximately 4 months before the first strike. Before addressing that buildup, the strategic bomber contribution to Epic Fury deserves specific attention because it represents one of the most logistically complex elements of the entire operation. The B-2 Spirit stealth bomber is based at Whiteman Air Force Base in Missouri. It is approximately 6,500 miles from Whiteman to the Persian Gulf. AB-2, flying a combat mission to Iran and returning to Whiteman, is conducting a round trip of approximately 13,000 miles. At the B-2's operational cruise speed, this mission takes over 30 hours. No aircraft can carry 30 hours of fuel. The B-2 missions to Iran required multiple aerial refueling contacts each way. KC-135, Stratotanker, and KC-46. Pegasus tanker aircraft based at Diego Garcia and Qatar flew pre-planned tanker tracks at specific altitudes and coordinates, waiting for the B-2S to arrive at pre-briefed rendezvous points, transferring tens of thousands of pounds of fuel per contact and repeating this process multiple times on each leg of the journey. Coordinating a B-2 mission from Missouri to Iran and back requires planning cells working 48 hours in advance. The tanker tracks have to be coordinated with all other aircraft using the same airspace. The refueling rendezvous points have to be calculated to account for wind, weather, and the precise fuel state of the B-2 at each point in the mission. The strike timing has to be integrated with the carrier-based strike packages to achieve coordinated time-on-target effects. Each B-2 mission over Iran during Epic Fury represented a logistics achievement that would have been considered extraordinary in any previous conflict. During Epic Fury, it was routine. The B-2s flew, the tankers were there, the fuel transferred, the bombs fell, the aircraft returned. This is not a coincidence. It is the product of decades of practice, of pre-positioned fuel stocks, of tanker crew proficiency developed through thousands of training missions, and of planning processes that have been refined through multiple conflicts. This is not a precise date, and it is not a public figure, but it is the logical conclusion of the operational timeline. Moving the quantities of weapons, fuel, and supplies needed to sustain high-intensity carrier operations for 30 to 60 days requires lead time. Ships move slowly. Procurement and contracting processes have minimum timelines. Pre-positioning stocks at forward bases requires coordination with host nations. Quietly, without announcement, the American military logistics system began filling the pipeline that would feed Epic Fury months before the political decision to execute was finalized. This pre-positioning is itself a form of deterrence signaling. The movement of combat logistics force vessels, the contracting for additional fuel storage, the buildup of munition stocks at forward bases. These actions are observable by satellite and by intelligence services. Iran could see the pipeline filling. They knew what a logistics buildup of this scale meant. It did not deter them, but it meant that when the strikes came, they came with full logistics support in place and the capacity to sustain operations indefinitely. The 900 strikes on March 1st did not strain the logistics system. They were within planned parameters. The system was designed to support that level of operations and more. That designed capacity is perhaps the most sobering fact in this entire story for any adversary of the United States. 900 strikes in one day, and the logistics chain was not at its limit. It was operating within normal parameters. There is a final element of the Epic Fury logistics story that has received no public attention, but that matters enormously for understanding what the operation revealed about American military capability. The strikes on March 1st were not supported exclusively by American logistics. Allied logistics systems were integrated into the operation throughout. British, French, and other Allied naval vessels participated in regional patrols and provided additional logistics nodes. Gulf state partners provided basing rights, fuel storage, and overflight permissions that shortened strike distances and reduced tanker requirements. The Five Eyes intelligence partners contributed targeting data and surveillance coverage that reduced the demand on American intelligence assets. The combined logistics system supporting Epic Fury was an alliance system, not just an American one. Every Allied contribution reduced the demand on American systems and extended the sustainable operational tempo. This matters because the alternative, the United States fighting alone without Allied logistics support, without forward basing, without overflight rights, would have been substantially more difficult and substantially more expensive. The alliance infrastructure that American foreign policy has maintained for 70 years was not a geopolitical abstraction during Epic Fury. It was a concrete operational capability that enabled 900 strikes in 24 hours. 900 strikes, one day. Months of preparation, thousands of sailors, billions of dollars of weapons, millions of gallons of fuel, an alliance logistics network spanning the Indian Ocean and the Middle East. Nobody photographed the supply ships. Nobody wrote the headlines about the ordnance handlers. But without them, the 900 strikes that everyone photographed and wrote about would not have happened. Logistics is where wars are won. Epic Fury proved it again. The numbers that define Operation Epic Fury logistics deserve to be stated in one place, clearly, because they are rarely assembled together. 2 carrier strike groups sustained full combat operations for approximately 15 days before the operational tempo began to moderate. Each strike group consists of the carrier itself plus 5 to 7 surface combatants, plus at least 1 submarine. Each carrier air wing consists of approximately 70 aircraft of multiple types. The logistics tail supporting those 2 strike groups included, at minimum, 4 combat logistics force vessels operating continuously. Each fast combat support ship displaces approximately 50,000 tons and carries fuel, ammunition, and stores sufficient to replenish a strike group multiple times. They were themselves replenished at sea or at forward ports while the carriers continued operations. The land-based component of the strikes added additional logistics complexity. B-2, Spirit stealth bombers flying from Whiteman Air Force Base in Missouri conducted missions that lasted over 30 hours round-trip, requiring aerial refueling multiple times each way. KC-135 and KC-46 tanker aircraft operated continuously from bases in Qatar and Diego Garcia to extend the range of both carrier-based and land-based strike aircraft. Each tanker mission transferred tens of thousands of pounds of fuel to strike aircraft at pre-planned refueling points over the Arabian Sea and the Gulf of Oman. The coordination required to move 900 aircraft through the same airspace in 24 hours, without collision, without friendly fire, and without navigation errors, represents an air traffic management achievement that civilian air traffic controllers would find difficult to comprehend. Military airspace management over a combat zone is orders of magnitude more complex than managing civilian airways. Every aircraft knew where every other aircraft was. Every tanker was in position when the strike aircraft arrived. Every recovery window on the carrier flight deck was sequenced correctly. 900 times in 24 hours. That is what American military logistics looks like when it is working. One more dimension of the Epic Fury logistics story matters for the future, and it is one that American military planners are actively wrestling with in the aftermath of the conflict. The munitions consumption rate during the operation exposed a gap that has been known in defense planning circles for years, but that the scale of Epic Fury made impossible to ignore. The American Defense Industrial Base produces precision-guided munitions at a rate that is adequate for training and for limited contingency operations. It is not adequate for sustained high-intensity combat. The 900 strikes per day rate, if sustained for 30 days, would have consumed munition stocks faster than the industrial base could replenish them. Epic Fury lasted approximately 15 days at high intensity before the operational tempo moderated. The stockpiles absorbed the consumption, but the margin was not as comfortable as planners would prefer. This is the same problem that emerged in the support operations to Ukraine starting in 2022, which drew down American and Allied stockpiles of certain munitions to levels that took years to rebuild. The lesson was supposedly learned. Production rates were supposed to increase. The production rate increase is happening, but slowly. Defense industry procurement cycles are measured in years, not months. Factory capacity cannot be doubled overnight. The workforce with the skills to manufacture complex precision-guided munitions cannot be trained quickly. Epic Fury consumed a significant portion of the additional production capacity that had been built up since 2022. The stockpiles are again being rebuilt. The factories are again running at surge rates. The question that keeps American logistics planners awake at night is straightforward. If Epic Fury had been against China rather than Iran, and if it had lasted not 15 days but 15 months, would the munitions supply chain have held? The honest answer, based on current production rates, is uncertain. That uncertainty is the real logistics lesson of Operation Epic Fury. The visible part, the 900 strikes in 24 hours, was a demonstration of extraordinary capability. The invisible part, the margin between what was consumed and what was available, was a warning. The strikes were spectacular. The supply chain that fed them was strained. Both things are true, and both things matter for what comes next.